So welcome to everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with me today. I think, as we've heard already today, all the discussions about AI, they've been starting, I've been hearing them all year. So I really wanted to kind of get into this concept of what is happening, how can AI disrupt healthcare, especially with a focus on clinical trials. So what I kind of like to start with is a little bit about your current role, right, and your work and what your company is doing in this area, because I think we have a very diverse panel here of participants from different spectrums across this topic. So I wanted to start with Ariel.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name's Ariel Katz. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of H1. H1, our mission is to connect the world to the right doctors, profile every doctor around the world, and tell you everything you want to know about them. A really powerful use case is who's the right doctor to run a clinical trial? It's a really expensive and important question. And when we started H1, the innovation was aggregating all the information that you'd want to know. Well, who's worked on clinical studies? What types of patients do they see? Do those patients fit my inclusion-exclusion criteria? Could they recruit diverse patients? And now the question is, can an AI model just predict that for me and predict the expected enrollment rate at all of the sites that I'm going to be selected, which was selected for me by a machine and not a human? And so we are working in that area and happy to share anything about that today.
Excellent. Quick, can you restart the timer? Thank you. Okay. David.
Yeah, hey, Stephanie. Thanks for being here. I'm joined by a great group of folks. I'm the chairman of Oracle Health. Joined Oracle about a year and a half ago. I was the CEO at Cerner, and Oracle purchased us. And it's been a blast. So what we're trying to do, and a piece of it is clinical trials, but what we're trying to do is a cloud-enabled platform that's open and connected, meaning we want to do this with partners, that brings together multiple things, including the EHR, supply chain, ERP, claims processing, and clinical trials, so that we can pull disparate data sets together to make sure whoever's either providing care or trying to run trials can get the right data at the right time in a way that's integrated out of the box, inexpensive, and actionable and intelligent.
Excellent. Christoph.
Yeah, hello everyone. Christoph Koenen. I'm heading up clinical development and operations at Bayer, and I've been doing this for the last 2 years. And as such, I am responsible for designing clinical trials, executing clinical trials, and analyzing and interpreting the results of clinical trials. And of course, we utilize AI across the entire value chain within pharma in Bayer. We utilize it specifically within the R&D organization, from the inception of a target to then prove this target to be valid in a clinical trial. And what we're specifically in clinical development are focused on is, on the one hand, making sure that AI can help us to define our clinical trials, the design, the patient population better, but on the other hand, can help us to identify both patients as well as centers that will then speed up our clinical trials, as well as dramatically improve the quality of the data we generate.
Excellent. Okan.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Okan Ekinci. I'm the head of innovation at Roche Information Solutions. Most of you will know Roche as a big pharma biotech company and diagnostics company, and as such, we're serving both on the upper end of the diagnostic continuum with diagnostic testing up until the level of genomic sequencing, but also downstream with treatments. So as a company that covers that whole journey, we come to the conclusion that personalized healthcare is one of the big topics that we need to cover and support with digital health solutions. So we are producing basically both internally used digital tools, but also tools for our clinicians and patients in order to create more data that are meaningful to actually personalize healthcare, both from the perspective of improving clinical trials. As you also know, we need more and better endpoints that accelerate clinical trials. So digital biomarkers and algorithms are one area, but then also how to integrate those digital biomarkers and algorithms in a meaningful way into clinical routine is then the downstream end on the clinical side. So as such, we're trying to support the convergence of research and clinical routine as much as we can with our products and solutions.
Excellent. And Patrick.
Hi everyone, I'm Patrick Loerch, SVP of Clinical Data Sciences at Gilead. Similar to Christoph, I'm accountable for data collection, quality, and analysis of our clinical trials. So it's the biostats statistical programming group. Within CDS is also included the real world evidence group, so the observational studies as well as the artificial intelligence. Similarly, we use it across the spectrum. So
Right.
outside of my group, we also leverage AI within commercial and
Yep.
research. I think Gilead has significantly scaled. So in terms of
Yeah.
increasing complexity in the number of trials, our real focus is execution and scaling our
Yeah.
clinical trials without the loss of quality.
Yeah. So, you kind of mentioned that, but we all know clinical trials have become increasingly more complex. We have decentralized clinical trials. We have a whole new area in the last couple of years. So I kind of want to ask each of you, to kind of just set the stage. What do you think is just quickly, one or two key areas that you think AI has had the most significant impact on? And maybe we'll start again with Ariel.
Yeah. So I think the press around AI and drug discovery and
Yeah.
clinical trials has been around the clinical side, which is great. But a lot of the costs and the time and the complexity is also on the operational side. And I've seen from the work that we've done, it's actually made a lot of movement there. It's hard to translate a e-consent form for a patient to Japanese if you only speak English. But generative AI could do that in 2 seconds for you. That's an operational task. It takes time, it takes money. And so we've seen quite a bit of movement on the operational side of running clinical studies, reducing time, reducing operational overhead by using, in particular, generative AI. I'll talk a bit about later around how we've seen predictive modeling. AI is a broad word. Everyone thinks of AI, I think of ChatGPT. So Gen AI helps a lot with language, but there's also machine learning and predictive analytics that you could build. And we've seen a lot around that to predict enrollment rates, predict study completion times, predict performance of investigators, predict where patients are going to be. And we've seen a lot of progress there. And we see that accelerating even more over the past year.
David?
Yeah, so for us, we have this thing called the Learning Health Network, and we basically have said to our customer base, so Cerner historically is the largest EHR in the world by far. And when we finish our VA rollout, again, we'll be the largest in the US. But part of our strength is really our community critical access hospitals that choose our product. And for those that have joined our Learning Health Network, which is basically a consortium of folks turning in their data and in return getting access to all the data, we've taken, of those 100+ health systems, about 50% or more are research naive. They've never done a trial. And to be able to have technologies like AI to allow them to have digital recruitment, understand their patients, understand how to do trials. These are places that have never done trials. It's been game-changing. So it's game-changing in a lot of ways. One, this consortium that we have has 3 times the diversity of any national trial group in the US.
Yeah.
And it's basically, the AI has allowed us to build the infrastructure to, I'm kind of exaggerating, but rural America, right? I mean, to allow it to happen in a way where before you needed a lot of people that had really world-class expertise, and they were all centered at academic medical centers or at specific research sites. So the tech, and I would say it's more than just AI. I mean, in some cases,
it's technology.
It's broadband. Like, there's just things, it's smartphones. There's things that have happened in the world of technology that have allowed us to capture patients from sites that have never, ever been engaged in trials. And then the other amazing part of that is it creates the pathway for those sites to now be comfortable if something's proven a diagnostic or med to start using it, so that these new discoveries aren't really then primarily done at academic medical centers and it takes 20 years to get out to rural America.
Yeah. Christoph, what do you think? One thing.
Okay, only one thing. So I mean, I don't want to repeat what's already been said. I think another point that is extremely important for me and that has proven to be very helpful in the last couple of years is this question about how good is standard of care right now in comparison to what we have in our historical databases. In an area like cardiovascular, for example, beating standard of care is extremely important. Defining that and defining the effect size that you expect based on old historical data can actually be a big problem. Using AI and getting up-to-date data out of real-world data set and define the standard of care as it is today is extremely useful and changes the way we design our clinical trials today.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. Okan.
If I would choose one, in addition to all the points mentioned, it would be probably the trend for decentralization of care. which is, as we said, happening both for clinical routine management of patients, but also for clinical trials. It would be the addition of novel markers in that setting. So it's a byproduct, if you want, of remotely monitoring people, that new data points come into the clinical trial environment.
Yeah.
By using more real-world data out of that environment, we have the ability now to create novel markers that really have already started helping us to accelerate trials by reducing sample size. You can actually get off much quicker, but you can also shorten the period of trials by seeing changes that are more subtle in the disease continuum, because you're now suddenly getting in with more multimodality data. So I think that is the biggest area where there's probably a bigger potential even in the future, of course.
Yeah, great point. Patrick?
Something that's not duplicative.
If there isn't, that's okay.
No. I guess the one that I would pick that hasn't been mentioned quite yet is the identification of KOLs outside of known academic institutes. So a lot of people don't realize it's just the manual process of reading the literature and digesting the literature to keep up to date with the KOLs. And most people think of generative AI in terms of creating content. It can also summarize content. So we leverage it to actually help us really stay on top of the KOLs in specific indications and diseases as well.
No, so I want to kind of take a little bit of a deep dive into some of the things that have been mentioned, right? And I think operations and efficiency, right? Like clinical trials can be complicated, and AI can really improve the overall quality of trials, right? It's not just about efficiency, it's quality. So I'd like to hear maybe a little bit, how do you think it can do that? Like, what is the impact? And maybe, Patrick, if you want to start. I know that's an area you work on deeply.
Quality, it's a big emphasis for us. So a couple examples, and just, it gets into the sausage making a little bit.
Yeah.
We receive data every 24 hours from sites around the world for every single clinical trial. Like, historically, the approach was called source data verification. We would send people out to all of these sites to literally check the EMR and check what was entered. AI and the infrastructure really allows us to do a lot of that remotely, taking a much more probabilistic and prioritized approach. So we can look at data every 24 hours and run algorithms that allow us to look for outliers, so that we can selectively send people out to assess data coming from sites. And that's really along the whole continuum of data entry as well, whether it's edit checks for when somebody enters something into a CRF. So we've found a lot of value already in leveraging AI to do something that would be highly manual and very expensive to send people around the globe.
Right. So that's a great example of how it can help. Okan, I know you have some thoughts on this.
And I would probably again come more from the clinical content perspective. The other session has shown that the imaging part, for instance, is a big holder of value, right, which is about to be exploited in a broader fashion. What I mean with that is increasing quality for trials means also how do I increase the fidelity of the data that I get on certain clinical variables, right? So reading a radiology image by eye is a different thing than quantifying this with radiomics markers and getting actually more data that are comparable, that are less prone to inter-observer variability. So those things are helping us now to more systematically actually bring data into clinical trials to then actually increase also the output out of the clinical trials, so with less input.
Right.
So that's, I think, a big area.
Christoph, I know you have some thoughts.
There's one other aspect when it comes to quality that I think, because that we're doing right now, where AI is really helpful, and that's the question around safety data. Help us identify safety data that we don't, a signal that we don't even think about. Yeah. Because what we've done in the past is, of course, basically looked for the known, and now we can actually look for something that is unknown to us. Yeah. And especially in larger trials, AI is extremely helpful in doing that.
Yeah, I think all of those are incredibly important points, and I also think when we're talking about, I want to follow on something I know that both Ariel and David have talked a lot about that I think is another critical aspect of this, that will also improve quality, right? Which is patient recruitment, right? Like patient, but it's more than just, and we've talked about this, and it's more than just patient recruitment. It's site selection, which you had mentioned, right? Like it is also PI, like investigators, like how you are able to recruit and work with all of these different components and how AI can help contribute and make that a better process. So I kind of want to start maybe with you, I think, Ariel, right? Like, because I know you've been working a lot in this, and I think it's broader than I think people actually think of in this context.
Yeah, so I don't know how many people in this room work at a CRO or in clinical ops.
You can raise your hand. Yeah.
You can raise your hand. I'm actually curious.
There we go.
Okay, cool. For the other 90%, you know how pharma companies or CROs pick sites and people to run their clinical trials that they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on and billions of risk? They look at who they worked with in the past. They go to clinicaltrials.gov. They buy data from different data sets. They look at claims data. And then they might have worked with a CRO. The CRO says, this site is 100% going to recruit. And do they recruit? Sometimes. And it costs $60,000 on the low end for a site. And you're picking hundreds of them if you're a big pharma company. And that's the way it works now. And it works a lot, sometimes, not all the time. And so you're looking at 20, 30% failure rates off of a $200 million line item budget a year for a big pharma company. It's crazy. So I don't think that's how it's going to work in the future. What I think is going to happen is, and we're seeing this now, sort of like self-driving cars. You have to get comfortable with not trusting the human from driving the car. You're going to be able to ask a question of, here's my inclusion-exclusion criteria, and here's my protocol for a clinical study. And say, I'm trying to recruit patients that fit this inclusion-exclusion criteria. Can you identify the sites and investigators that have capacity, have successfully enrolled in the past, and you think will enroll on this clinical study based off the sentiment of what they tweeted about my company and published in the literature and spoke in the past 5 years at the conference? Who should I work with and why? And give me a summarized explanation and predict what my enrollment rates would be. It actually could work now. And so I think it's going to transform the way that we think about site selection, PI selection. I've seen pilots happen in this area where you could save real dollar signs, and that money could be spent in different ways of engaging patients in other areas. I think the whole type and way we think about PI selection, site selection is going to change over the next 2 years. And no longer is it going to be, I'm going to call my CRO and ask who do they have experience working with. I think that's going to change, and we're seeing that start to change.
All right, so it's not something people are thinking about in how AI can be used. I just think it's fascinating. I know, David, I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about, all of us, is about speed and increasing the aperture, right? So we're talking about using the tools to get the right sites and the right docs, to take the pharmacovigilance data and have it better connected to the real world data so we get better understanding, so things go back and forth. And fundamentally, when you think about it, we've spent 40 years trying to digitize the record. And what have we gotten out of it? So far, no one got treated for COVID and somebody said, oh, we don't have your chart, Dr. Smith took it home over the weekend. And no one during COVID said, the pharmacist can't read your writing. Did you say amiodarone or amiloride, right? So we fixed legibility and we moved charts to digital. But now we have the opportunity to say, let's get everyone who wants to be enrolled in clinical trials. And it is really a small subset of the population, which actually means the data is not really great. And let's capture on things that we never would have thought of, because this compute is smarter than us. And it can actually help us figure things out that the human would take 10,000 years to figure out. So to me, the AI is about closing some gaps, increasing the aperture, and more importantly, it's about speed. Like, there's some incredible scientific advances that we should know about and be able to get into clinical practice much faster. And these folks are the pharma folks. We're doing R&D for the world right here in the US, if you really think about it. Like, this is a moral imperative for us to get this right if we really want to decrease the burden. And I kind of think it's the right time because all these things have come together.
Right.
The thing is, it's digitized now. We got AI. We got the infrastructure. We can think about things in a much more sophisticated way.
So I'd love to hear the pharma folks' insight on especially patient recruitment and also the sites, the investigators. What are your thoughts? Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah. No, as a pharma folk. So sorry, I'm not supposed to touch my mic. We have started down the path of what you described. I don't know about tweets, but
Or X's, what are they called there?
Or X's, yeah, I'm not sure what they're called these days. I think, the one thing for us that's also missing is even just starting before developing the protocol. So one of the interesting use cases that we found is, correcting biases within our clinical trials and unintentional biases. The natural tendency for scientists is to try to collect everything and as much data as we can and high frequency of visits. We are leveraging AI in terms of recruitment rates to help us optimize protocol design to expand the aperture, as you said. Because if you have scheduled visits that occur through a work week, you are introducing unintentional biases into your patient population. So I think one area that has been discussed is really trying to back it all the way up to the protocol concept sheet. We do agree with you. I think there's a lot of improvement on site selection that we're starting to see some really interesting data come back in terms of rethinking how we do that and how that can impact speed as well.
Yeah. Christoph, Okan?
Yeah, if I may maybe build a little bit upon something that I'm still missing, actually. Yeah, because yes, we're utilizing AI and it helps us to identify the right patients. It's faster. Yeah, we go to the right investigators. But we still have a lot of steps in that process. Yeah, and of course, if conceptually, if you think about, if I could design a world where clinical trials and patient recruitment in clinical trials is easier. I mean, the same database that I use in real-world evidence to define my protocol and determine the standard of care in a certain disease has actually patients in it. So, and those are patients that are potentially eligible for my clinical trial.
Right.
So why can't I actually get the patient information and connect that patient with a site and then include in a clinical trial? Yeah, I mean that's kind of the part that, in my opinion, is still missing. I know there's a lot of discussion around it. There is some work being done to make this happen, but I do think that if we want to really develop faster, better innovation for our patients, we have to get much, much better at doing that. Yeah, because for right now, for my taste, there's still way too many steps in between to really get that patient into the trial.
I mean, is this part of is this part of the data issue, right? Like, there's so much data. Like, how can AI help us unify the data? I mean, I think that's kind of where you're getting to. And it may not just be data in relation to the clinical trials. It may be data across the board to make it more efficient and effective. And I know, Okan, this is a topic you are passionate about. So I'm going to start with you on the data part.
Yeah, thanks. And indeed, this is a long story, right? So it has a 20-plus year history. And even though we have now broad spread utilization of EMRs, we still have disparate data sources. Is it even starting with our own environments like laboratories, digital pathology, other environments, which now come with their own markers, right? And how do you bring them all into the context of these, let's say, decision-making environments has been one of the big topics that we tried to address over the last few years. And it's probably worthwhile to mention that just giving a solution as a clinical decision support that has a clinical trial match has not solved the problem. Why? Because with the complexity of the clinical trials, you do need to really empower those tools to be able to read data from different sources, and structure has not been there all along. So what has changed, I think, now recently, and the prospect is now the thing that I want to mention, probably this effort of structuring data, we might overcome to some extent with large language models. Now, bringing that in and bringing more foundation models in healthcare will probably help us to actually not only connect the data, but really bring sense into, let's say, notes and other type of unstructured data in the context of selecting patients for trials. Because the last mile, typically, if you have inclusion criteria, let's say 20, but the 3 parameters are missing because they're not structured, will not help you to really make the wise choice for the patient. So I think that gap, there is a big potential looking forward to close that gap and make sure that patients can be matched to the right trials more automatically behind the scenes. And then at the point of decision making, like you're in a tumor board as a clinician, you would actually be presented more naturally those opportunities for the patient and then opt out rather than try to find something by yourself, but rather need to opt out if you don't want to send the patient to the trial.
I'm sure some other folks have some thoughts on the data issue. So, David, maybe if you have some.
I think it's really important as we start thinking about this, not just in clinical trials, but all clinical decision support and even some administrative things. Our data is only as good as the data. And the data, by definition, doesn't include folks that don't get health care, that need health care. And it oftentimes is biased toward those in places in the clinical trial space that go to places like academic medical centers. So
Right.
we have to be very intentional about how I don't think we should wait. I think we have an opportunity to really, really put a dent in the world in this space. But let's be super careful that we're not having a panel here in 10 years about how we missed it because we believed that the data sources that we got were actually representative of the community, which they're really not. That doesn't mean we can't fix it and work on it. So I just think that let's be super careful as we embark on this.
Yeah, I mean, it is a common, I mean, not common, but a perception that the data has, it's garbage in, garbage out, but the data has a bias affiliated with it, right? But what you're saying is you can reach those marginalized populations.
Yeah, absolutely.
With this, and it can actually help you do that.
I agree.
And reach those communities if we use it properly, so that we aren't having this conversation 10 years down the road and say, what happened? Right? Anyone else want to add to that conversation on the data point?
The only thing I'll add is,
Yeah.
actually, it really worries me. So I've seen it live. So how many have used ChatGPT or one of those services?
Oh, I do, yeah. Sorry.
It looks super right all the time, even though it's wrong half the time. And that's actually a bad thing if we're using it to make multi-million-dollar decisions about people's lives. And so when we were playing with the technology, just with our own data, I'd ask the question, who's the best PI to work on this clinical trial in heart failure? And it would give like an unbelievably compelling answer that was wrong, but it looked right. And that's a scary thing. And then if you suck in all your feasibility questionnaires for the non-clinical people in the audience, like pharma folks on the clinical side send questionnaires to sites to see if they have the right tools and if they're available. Suck in all of your historical performance data, all the tweets, all the clinical trials I worked on, everything. It starts to get smarter and answer it more correctly. But it sounds just as convincing. And so it's like the naked eye. I mean, we're all busy day to day. You just want an answer that looks right. I'm really worried that this data silos, similar to what, of course, Christoph said, like H1 doesn't have all the data in the world. Oracle doesn't have all the data in the world. But we're all going to be offering solutions with AI that's going to be on a slice of the universe.
Right, yeah.
And we're all going to think it's really right because it looks right and it says it in such a convincing way. And I really worry about that. And I worry like, oh my God, did we develop something where someone made this huge decision on that was wrong because they didn't have all the data. And I couldn't even fathom what that data is, and the data didn't exist. And it's a big fear that we have, and people are going to be making decisions off this because it just sounds so right when it presents the information.
Yeah, I think we need to have the data talk to each other. I think it's this conversation, not just internally, but externally, and I know there are issues with that, but if we're at least having the conversation and thinking about it in those terms, I think it will make a big difference. But I feel that fear. Anything else that anyone wants to add, from the unification of the data before I kind of move on to another point I wanted to get across? We're good? We're not going to solve every problem here. I do want to touch on the regulatory. We're not going to solve that problem either, but I don't think we can have this conversation without at least acknowledging what some of the regulatory challenges are and that they exist and what we should be thinking about in the context of using AI, especially with clinical trials. So maybe Christoph, if you want to start off with some thoughts on the regulatory, at least what to think about.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, again, if, you have I know if I had a wish, yeah, of course I would like to, instead of running costly, large, cumbersome cardiovascular outcome trials, yeah, I would like to do this in a real-world environment, yeah, preferably using already existing electronic patient records, yeah, and have regulators accept the data as regulatory-grade data, yeah. I'm convinced that somehow we will get there, but we're far from it right now.
Yeah.
Where I think we as sponsors of clinical trials have a responsibility as working with regulators to kind of slowly get us there. Yeah? I think right now conversations are happening about rare diseases. Right now conversations are happening about pediatric population where the need is much higher. The risk is much higher of not doing an intervention versus doing an intervention in a traditional clinical trial. So that is something where we are already having discussions with regulators that slowly get us towards having innovative clinical trial designs that are less cumbersome for patients, that put patients less at risk, but get us to the same results. And as the experience with this evolves and we get more confident in the quality of doing that, I'm convinced that regulators will move with our help and to some extent with us pushing the envelope a little bit towards a world where the maybe traditional randomized controlled clinical trials where I have a CRF that collects the data that has to be filled in by a site might actually be the exception or not the rule anymore.
Yeah, it's a great point. Patrick?
No, I completely agree with Christoph. I think we can learn a lot even from the white papers recently around real-world evidence. I think it's important to involve regulators early and connect with them as often as you can, candidly. I think the worst thing folks can do, especially early companies or technology companies moving into this space, is show up with data already in hand. I think we saw a lot of those lessons learned the hard way in the real-world evidence side. So showing up, incorporating them into the plan. I remind startups all the time that approach me that GCP is GCP. It doesn't matter what methodology you use. It doesn't matter if it's AI, if it's biostatistics, or bean counting, candidly.
Right.
So that my advice would be the same. I'd work with them closely, work with them often. View regulatory agencies as a collaborator, not as sort of a hurdle to jump over. And I do agree. I think eventually we'll get there. Gilead has a number of CAR T therapies where we've had a lot of success leveraging real-world evidence. I think it's just finding those use cases and those scenarios where AI creates value above and beyond a traditional clinical trial without creating that additional risk for patients.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. Yeah. So it's something I think if we ignore, we've missed a part of this whole puzzle. I want to ask kind of each of you, what do you envision, looking ahead? Like if we start thinking about where we're gonna be going forward, what do you envision as the future impact of AI in clinical trials, and the future of healthcare? Are there any kind of, and this could be even a little more general, but are there any emerging trends, advancements that you're seeing that you think are particularly promising? What are you really looking forward to in the year coming up? So Ariel, maybe we want to start.
Big question. So
yeah.
It's actually, a lot of us traveled to San Francisco for this conference. When we started H1, our mission is to connect the world to the right doctor. We actually didn't start in pharma. The question I wanted to ask was, I'm traveling to San Francisco, who's the best cardiologist for me to see my heart is hurting? And you can't do that, you can't Google it today. And so the idea, which I'm really excited about, is H1ing that in the future. With the right data, with generative AI, to be able to ask that type of question, understand it, compute all the relevant data. That's what I imagine. And it's a very similar question to who's the best PI to run my clinical study based off all the criteria that someone cares about that's sponsoring a clinical study, similar to a patient. And so I'm really excited about the natural language approach to this instead of needing to learn SQL and filters and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about how that's going to reduce friction around those questions.
No, I'm excited about that too. David?
Well, you threw in at the end this year. I thought you were going to
Well,
go
and we
up,
could
but
go 5 years.
this year.
It's not going to happen this year.
I liked it.
Honestly,
it.
we could go 5 years down the road.
I liked it, Stephanie.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We
this
could do
year,
a short term and a long term.
I'll go with this year. I think that, and I'm going to go off your word of friction, I think right now for a lot of people, dealing with cancer through the health system is sometimes worse than the cancer. And you see that with bankruptcies, et cetera. I think when you look at the percentage of docs that say, I don't want to practice anymore, the burnout and the joy has gone for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I would say a lot of that is our fault. And I think that this tool has the potential to make it that when I get a diagnosis of depression or Alzheimer's, I can focus on my depression and Alzheimer's and not worry as much about how do I get the appointment? What is an EOB? What does this mean? And that the caregivers will spend much more time at the bedside than at the terminal. And that's what they all signed up to do. And I think we have the opportunity, in a sense, when you think about it, as a clinician, before technology, all you did was sit next to the patient. I mean,
Right,
you literally sat at the bedside and waited until the fever broke. And now you don't even look at the patient because you're clicking. And I think we have the opportunity to go clickless, which means the nurse will be there with you, the doc will be there with you, and we can really focus on what's probably most important is the dis-ease that you have, as opposed to this crazy system that we have. And every patient that I've treated, when you say, would you like to participate in something that could help you and help others, they would all sign up.
Right.
There's no, so I think this is my part of not this year. I think we need to get every patient as a study patient, that we literally become a learning health system where everybody, it's an opt-out. Everybody is, we should be learning on every single patient.
Right.
When you treat me, it should be based on everything that happened before me. So, but that's not my this year. This year, I think we can get.
May take some. We may have a way to
That'll
get there.
be 2 years.
But I love that. Like, and it's interesting because I think of it in terms of patient, but the impact on the caregiver and the doctor. You always think about the system being burdensome for the patient. And I think we frequently forget how burdensome it is for the clinicians and the doctors too.
We don't. They tell
You
us all
don't,
the
yeah,
time.
but I do. Christoph.
So short term, what I do see will happen is that we will be able to connect the right patient to the right clinical trial.
Right. Yeah.
We will be able to utilize web search history. Yeah, whatever they're interested in, X, what they look at, what tweets. I'm not even sure they're even called tweets anymore. To kind of identify those patients, get a message to that person that there is an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial. Yeah? That is going to happen already. That will happen even more. And at the same time, I was talking about the databases we're working with to determine our effect size. Yeah? I am convinced that within this year or next year, at least in some of these databases, we will actually be able to really take those patients then and again connect that person to a clinical trial as well. That will happen. That is already happening, and that will actually happening on a much broader scale.
Also exciting. Okan.
Yeah, if I think about 5+ years from now, not 1+ year, I would say it's the impact of the curse of multidimensionality. What I mean with that is personalized healthcare sounds nice, but at the end of the day, it's about taking hundreds of parameters into account to just make one treatment decision. And clinicians feel overwhelmed. Burnout is one impact of that, not only reason, but one impact that it creates. So I think inevitably we're getting to the point that even clinical trials as we define them today will probably look different in, let's say, 10 years from now, because every routine clinical decision making will have an aspect of a trial. Because you're going to get some, let's say, parameters into account, new parameters that have perhaps not been tested even in a clinical trial, but you will derive decisions based on probabilistic approaches. So I think we're at the advent of probably redefining even what we mean when we say clinical trials, both as companies but also as clinicians, and that's ultimately what I meant also in the beginning with this convergence of research and routine. We will probably not be able to escape that.
No, looking forward to that as well. Patrick.
I guess mine's slightly different. So, I mean, we focus a lot on clinical trials, but everyone here knows that's just the first step. It's demonstrating efficacy and safety. There's a whole barrage of observational research and studies that need to go on outside of that. It's interesting to me, and I think it was brought up, that evidence generation, whether it's EMR data or whether it's clinical trial data, happens at the point of that physician-patient interaction. I think I get really excited when I think about large language models, when I think about the ability of transcribing data to just bridge the gap between high quality, complete data from a clinical trial, but narrow in scope, and the breadth and depth that you get from electronic medical records. Because the challenge from someone who runs both the biostats and the epi team is we were just constantly working around the biases in the data, as you mentioned. So this idea that one day in the future, the epidemiologists and biostatisticians will kill me. You might actually just have data scientists in a field where we can very, very quickly, once we get approval, just demonstrate the efficacy and safety across multiple patient populations, across multiple regions, as opposed to this multi-year process we have to go through, when we get approval and then you expand into indications and populations.
I mean, I think there's so much to look forward to. It's very exciting, and it's going to be interesting to see where this goes next year and in 5 years and 10 years down the road. So I want to thank, unfortunately, we are out of time, so I do want to thank all of you for taking your time with me today. Really looking forward to seeing where everything goes for all of you in the next couple of years, especially in this space. It's moving so quickly. I feel like this conversation changes every couple of months. I hear more and more. So it's a really exciting discussion to have on a regular basis. So thank you to all of you for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.